Yellow and Red mix by Digits 27, Chapter 16. Naruto was so confused by the strange man's words that he almost missed the sewer path leaping at him. As it was, he had enough time to duck down, letting the semi-mechanical man sail overhead. At the last moment, he struck out, grabbing one of his many hands before using it to slam the man into the ground hard. Dust was seen bursting into the air as Naruto leapt back from the fresh crater he had just made with the man's body. It proved to be a mistake as he re-emerged from the smoke, raising one of his arms at Naruto, who watched as it seemed to separate. He blinked once at the odd tube like contraption inside the arm, being reminded once again of Sasori and the way the Surapan's body seemed to be filled with weapons. His blink turned into a look of disbelief as something was promptly fired from the arm, suddenly towards him at astounding speeds. Naruto leapt to the side, but not before he felt whatever it was graze his shirt. He tucked into a roll as he hit the ground, turning in time to see the launched bomb reduce the building behind him into rubble. Naruto looked at the smoking crater that had once been a clothes store in Shaka before pushing off the ground hard as he heard another of the projectiles getting let loose. Again, he dodged it, but not by much. Even with his healing factor, he wasn't going to survive being blown apart. He knew from experience that this was only scratching the tip of the iceberg of weapons the Surapatha no doubt stored in his body. Not wanting to find out about the rest, he came up with a plan, grinning as he dodged a third missile, feeling the familiar rush of chakra through his system. Time around him ground to almost a stop. He could see everything around him in almost perfect clarity, even pieces of rubble that just seemed to be moving lazily through the air, like it was treacle. He rushed forward, kicking up a trail of sand behind him from the sheer speed he was moving. When he got close enough, he smirked as he saw one of the bombs about to leave its tube. The man's eyes were only just beginning to follow him in shock, but he didn't give him the chance as he quickly jabbed kunai into the tube. Dashing off to the other side of the square, he turned in time to see the man blink once before the area around him erupted into flaming heat. Time warped for Naruto before everything caught up to him. Rubble falling at the right speed again. He watched, panting from the exertion, the technique put on his body, looking for any sign that the Zurapath had survived. He screamed when he saw a pile of machinery that looked vaguely human-shaped, smoldered at the bottom of a crater. Its warped and slightly melted tail and blade glinting in the sun. He didn't get long to celebrate before he was sent hurtling forward by some unseen but definitely felt force. He ground in the crater he had created on impact, picking himself up while clutching his head. QB working overtime to fix him up. He looked around, clutching his healing ribs with slowly refocusing eyes that picked up the form of a spiky orange-haired man looking at him with irritation. Strangely, he almost seemed to allow Naruto to recover, letting him stagger out of the crater before managing to stand straighter. "All right, I forgot about you." And Gar observed the two men buried up to their necks in sand as calmly as he could. However, between the six of them, they had already managed to damage his village extensively. He narrowed his eyes as he closed his hand slowly, letting their bodies sink beneath the sand as he gradually increased the pressure on their bodies. Already he could feel his control over the large one slipping as he used his annoying ability to drain away chakra. He tried to crush the other man before he could do anything, but he found his control over the sand around him as well. His control over the sand around him as well. In desperation, he clenched his hand shut, forcing whatever sand was still under his control to violently contract. However, hopefully crushing everything below him. Feeling a slight tremor beneath him, he quickly formed a platform out of his sand before letting it carry him upwards. Just as a strong hand burst out of the ground, intent on grabbing his leg, he watched with cold eyes as both of the orange-haired men pulled themselves up out of the sand. However, the Naraka path was now missing an arm. Gold dust, a thousand phantom blades. He propelled the tiny golden particles forward as fast as he could, releasing them in a constant stream from the seal on his palm. However, the path quickly launched himself into their path. Arm stretched before he lost control. He diverted the particles and bringing them back to him to lazily orbit him as a ring of gold. His eyes narrowed in irritation, trying to come up with a solution to the problem. The path post. However, even as he gazed at them evenly, the fingers of his right hand twisted ever so slightly. Once again, he sent a barrage of dust down at one of them, and once again, the path made it hit on. However, at the last moment, he cut his connection with the dust, allowing the heavy particles to be carried forward by their own momentum instead of his chakra. The path was unprepared for this, and quickly raised his arm to shield his eyes from being blinded. Gaara smirks, suddenly focusing all of his attention on one spot behind the Naraka path. A small gold dust that he had hidden there earlier burst outwards. Golden dust, Kimpaku Tome. The flurry of gold particles that attacked the man. However, instead of acting like a blade, it began to congeal around his body, covering it with a final layer of gold. The last thing to be covered were his eyes, staring up at Gaara in defiance, even as his body froze. Unable to move with the heavy coating of gold, Gaara paused for a moment before clenching his hand closed. The effects were immediate, and the golden statue that was once the Naraka path began to glow blindly. The gold dust heated up, melting onto the man before fusing together, forever sealing his fate as a glittering gilded statue. Immediately, the other path rushed over, placing his hand on the statue to try and absorb the chakra, only to recoil before the scalding metal burned through his hands. There was no chakra left in the statue anyway. Gaara didn't need to maintain it once the actual gold dust had melted together. He would be able to break it down later into particles into particle form, but for now he still had to focus on the enemy that was left. Do you know what temperature gold melts at? The pretty path stared at him blankly, with possibly a hint of irritation, taking its silence as an invitation to continue. Gaara did so. 1,000 degrees Celsius. By now, the man inside of there is nothing but ash. The sands began to swarm around him, forming a loose shell that could harden at any moment. Your fate will be much worse. Tia dodged again, finding that right now it was all she could do. The human path had sped up remarkably, and now apparently taking her as an actual threat. Already it had thrown Matsuri across the street, and Tia could only hope that the girl was okay. She couldn't check herself. She couldn't check herself. Parrying a blow from one of the chakra rods, she tried to feint to the left and getting inside the man's guard, only to be swatted away casually. She landed in a 3-point stance, so staff up behind her in the air before she slammed it point down into the ground. Tremor! It erupted in front of her as she sent incredible amounts of lightning chakra through the earth, heading in a somewhat straight line towards the human path. He was caught off guard, reacting too slow before electricity arced up all around him, and passing through his foot. Even as the path jumped away, he landed a little unsteadily with one of his feet completely numbed below the ankle, causing him to stumble. She noticed him blink once as he looked off to the left, towards where some of the other battles were taking place. It was only a momentary hesitation, but it was all Tia needed as she sprung forward, launching her staff ahead of her like a spear. The human path could only blink in shock as he looked down, finding a large 5-foot metal bow staff embedded right in the center of his chest. Tia smirked as she rushed forward to deliver the finishing blow. However, she was expecting the man to be cringing in pain, unable to move from the lighting chakra coursing from the pole. That was why she was so surprised too surprised to act when his arm flashed out, roughly grabbing her by the top of her head. Instantly, she felt all too familiar feeling return as the life was slowly and literally pulled out of her being. The man said nothing. This time, only staring at her with those cold, almost lifeless eyes. Tia actually found herself trembling slightly as she sunk to her knees. The strength in her legs leaving her entirely. Color drained away from her vision as the coldness permeated her very being. She felt something trickle down her face before she realized it was a tear. A single ice-cold droplet of water leaked from her eyes as she stared back at the orange-haired man. She was crying because she didn't want to die. Not like this. She may have put on a tough facade around others, but really feared death, and she wanted to live so that she could grow up with Naruto, so that she could continue to hold him at night, and feeling his warmth through her. She didn't want to leave him alone. She wanted to leave him alone in the world. And however selfish it sounded, she wanted to be the only woman he loved. As more tears steamed down her face, the seal on her shoulder began to glow a warm blue, meekly at first, but quickly growing in intensity. Her hair grew out, longer and fuller as it took on a bright pink hue. Her eyes shifted, being pools of pure emerald that continued to cry tears in rivers. Her body grew in places as muscles also strengthened, naturally becoming infused with chakra as a massive influx overcame her body. Naruto's chakra flooded in through the seal, quickly converted to something she could use, and use as she did. It was almost unnoticeable at first through the darkness that was clouding her vision, but as soon as she saw that bright patch of blonde, she clung to it, not letting go for 1 second. Without even realizing it, her hand twitched, gaining life as the cold palette tone that had overcome it receded for a moment. It slowly moved up before with trembling fingers it wrapped around cold metal, reacting purely on instinct. By this point, Tuya released all of her pain and anger through that contact, and pouring it all out in the form of unbridled and unrestrained chakra. The bow staff glowed brightly from all the energy rushing through it before the man's eyes widened uncontrollably. Every muscle in his body and suddenly contracted, and he lost the ability to control it. His grip on the red-haired hair loosened, allowing Tuya to fall to the ground. However, her hold on her staff didn't waver. Regaining control over her body, she only increased the flow as the human path began to smoke, being cooked from the inside out by the violent lightning chakra coursing through his body. Tuya slowly regained her strength, managing to get to her feet unsteadily, staring at the dying man with merciless emerald eyes. Like hell, I'm fucking dying in the middle of the fucking street like a rat. And with that, she let go of the staff, but not before passing one last massive pulse of chakra through it, giving it everything she had left. The human path was unable to do anything for a moment. His muscles were locked in place by the electricity still coursing through it, and then like a puppet with its strings cut, he simply dropped to the ground, motionless. Tuya cautiously walked over, kicking him once to check that he was really dead before signing relief. After this was all over, she was going to seriously thank Naruto for that seal. It had literally saved her life. She never intended to get that close to death again, not until she could live the life she wanted with Naruto on her own terms. Her eyes widened for a moment as she realized that Matsuri was still hurt, and she quickly rushed over to see what she could do, or even if she could help. Fu smiled weakly as she watched the body of the animal path rocket towards the ground, flying after him to make sure he didn't try anything. She was almost expecting him to somehow produce another summon, saving himself from the deadly descent. However, she was relieved when he simply impacted on the ground. The street exploding around came from the force behind the impact. Lightly, she fluttered down, only to find she had interrupted Naruto's fight with the deep path. Both of them now looking at the crater, one in shock and the other without emotion. Watch out! The mid-haired girl spun to the side on her older brother's warning, narrowly avoiding getting bitten clean through as a large dog jumped through the space as she had been hovering. To her surprise, when the dust and the breeze cleared, she could clearly see the animal path standing, somewhat weakly, at the center of the deep hole his body had formed. Fu spun in the air again to avoid another dog, this one definitely aiming to clamp its jaw around her neck. She dropped to the ground to avoid a third before backpedaling, unknowingly bumping up against Naruto. The two spun before recognizing one another, each smiling at the other, but only briefly before both their eyes widened. Fu was about to cry out to her brother, but not before he suddenly tackled to the floor, letting two snorting dogs sail over both of them, letting them both take the Shinra Tensei at full force. They were blasted back furiously, but didn't make it very far before bursting into smoke. Naruto threw Fu to the side and quickly unsealed the two familiar blades, throwing them over to her. The mid-haired girl caught them deftly, looking at them a little surprised Naruto had given her the kiba. What am I supposed to do with these? Naruto grinned manically at her then jumping to the right as he avoided getting blasted by another invisible attack. Do what I do, swing them at random and really hope you hit something. He couldn't get any more out before he was violently flung high into the air. Taking a glance in Shinro Tensei that had him spinning, Fu just nodded in determination as she spun to meet the animal path, her eyes opening in shock as she suddenly found her two black rods swinging at her. She brought the blades up on instinct, trying to block the attack to both her and the animal's path surprise. The black rods were neatly bisected in two. Fu blinked once before grinning, lashing out with the two swords, trying to slice the orange-haired man in two. He jumped back, putting his hands into a steel as he did so. Immediately, the large panda burst out of a cloud of smoke, attempted to gore Fu with its large claws. He just jumped at it. She just jumped at it, using her wings to propel herself forward at speed with the two razor-sharp swords out in front of her. Like a small green drill, she burst out of the other side, spinning fiercely, not even looking back as the panda disappeared in smoke. She grinned as the animal path put its hands together again for another summoning. However, Fu didn't let him this time. Instead, launching one of the swords at him. It was aimed at his chest, but he jumped out of the way, only letting it skim his arm and drawing a thin trail of blood. Unfortunately for him, he had jumped directly into the path of the second Kiba. This time, he was unable to move, and it pierced him directly through the chest, pinning him securely to the wall behind him. Fu dropped to the ground, and now huffing slightly, never having been in a fight hit this hard. The animal path observed her coldly, unable to move, but showing no sign. He even felt the shining sword sticking out of his ribcage. Fu caught her breath and stood up straighter, clutching her wrist like she had injured it. Energy began to coalesce in her palm, even as the animal path raised a hand to keep us hilt, pulling it slowly out of his body and by extension the wall. Fu was nowhere near as good with Sengon as her brother, but he had taught her enough for this one last move. Firefly Rasengan! She charged forward even as the ball of energy in her palm contracted down to the size of a small insect, glowing even brighter from the condensed energy. She thrust her hand forward, burying her palm into the orange-haired man's chest. She panted from holding back the energy before she finally let it go, using her wings to quickly pull herself back and into the sky. The animal path finally freed itself from the wall, pulling the sword from his body while ignoring the strange feeling in his chest. Fucha smirked before the street was filled with a blinding light as all the chakra contained within the tiny sphere finally burst out all at once, shredding everything in its path. When the bright light finally faded, there was nothing left of the animal path but the occasional scrap of black cloth that floated down from the sky. Fu finally breathed a sigh of relief before falling to her knees. The exhaustion finally catched up to her. "I did it, Oni-san!" She quickly passed out on the ground, her body too tired to keep trying. On going. Gar was forced to move forward, raising the platform he was standing on away from the path, which continued to try and get close to him. Each time he would come close, only for Gar to move further away, and try to move further away and try to swat him down with a whip of sand. The large man would then proceed to absorb the chakra in the sand before it could cause him any real damage. Landing securely on the ground below him, they continued this strange back and forth dance for a while, neither really able to gain the upper hand on the other. Finally, though, Gara had enough time to think of and Gara had a plan. Was a dangerous enemy. The next time the path landed, he suddenly found more sand spikes leaping out of the ground to skewer him. He raised his hands to dissipate them, but before they got too close, they suddenly flared. What was left was thinner but more compacted, translucent spike. He still tried to absorb the attack, only to find no chakra in the blade of glass, allowing it to cut into his hand in a moment of hesitation. Now the guard had an advantage. He pressed it mercilessly, forcing the large man to dodge and weave as glass spikes began to shoot out every surface. They shattered on impact when they missed, and gained glancing blows when they didn't. Drawing more and more blood each time. Even as he had the orange-haired man dancing around on the ground to avoid him, he began to gather a large cloud of sand above him, compressing it further and further until it weighed more than a house. It glowed, being heated up until the sand particles fused, their molecular structure being reformed until an enormous block of glass floated above the square. Gar could only barely control it in this form, so he just let it fall to the floor directly on top of the path. The large strange man could only look up at the massive translucent the block descend on his body. He was already sprinting to the side, but he knew he wouldn't make it out in time. Before it hit, Gar exerted the last portion of control he could, shattered the block into thousands of deadly and chakra-free shards that quickly covered every inch of the square. He calmly observed the end of his rather anticlimactic battle, ignoring the ugly red strain on the ground in favor of trying to find where Naruto was fighting, hoping to help if it was necessary. He needed to put a stop of this before something bad happened to his friends or his village. Naruto had lost count how many times he had gotten close to pain, only to be swiftly launched back by some invisible force. It was like the man was untouchable, lending at least some incredibility to his constant ranting about how he was a god. Naruto tried to tune it out the best he could. Religious fanatics kind of bugged him at the best of times. In the middle of a fight where he seemed to be doing negligible damage was even worse. He got to his feet after climbing out of one of the numerous Naruto-shaped craters that now littered the street they had been fighting in. Suddenly he felt his grip on the ground loosen as he was pulled forward. His arms flailing uselessly behind him as he hurtled towards pain. The man had one hand extended out to him, while a long chakra rod slid from his sleeve, held ready to pierce Naruto's body. Quickly, Naruto flashed away, landing on a roof where one of his kunai had fallen earlier in the fight. There was a few scattered around, but like he had just done, they were only good for getting away. He couldn't get closer. He couldn't get closer. He couldn't get closer. One close enough to pain to utilize the techniques fully. He sighed, putting his hand into now almost instinctual seal before hundreds of copies of him suddenly appeared all around the street, lining every rooftop. Pain seemed unconcerned by the sudden influx of orange surrounding him, even when they all simultaneously launched themselves at the man. He waited till the last minute, then all the Narutos were as close as they could be without touching him. One of the clones even had a smile on his face as it reared back its fist, hoping to finally land the first strike on Pain. Shinra Tensei! Simultaneously, all the clones winced as they were blasted back, the shockwave of force moving in every direction. However, what Pain didn't see, thanks to the sea of large covering his view, were the few clones that stayed behind the rest, just staying on the outskirts of the attack. They finally landed one of them hurtling its fist right behind Pain's eyes, startling the normally unflappable Akatsuki member as he was sent flying back. His back struck as one of the clones waited behind him, kicking him up into the sky, only to be smacked right back down by an impressive axe kick. Pain crashed to the floor, finally creating a crater of his own. Even as he pushed away a few more clones that got too cocky, he stood back up, narrowing his eyes at Naruto as the boy jumped back into the street, staring defiantly over at Pain with a smirk. I know it. There's a delay before you can use that attack again. A few seconds, maybe. The spiky-haired man's eyes narrowed, the rings around his iris looking like they were actually rippling. Not that many people have ever lived long enough to work that out. Naruto's smile only grew bigger before it reset into a more serious expression. Cockiness could come later. He heard the footsteps before he saw who it was. Turning to spot Yu running towards him, seal activated and staff at the ready. At the same time, Naruto spotted Gar soaring over the building on a platform of sand. As his smirk reappeared on his face, he joined his friends in rushing the orange-haired man, each of them coming from a different direction, intending to attack him from all sides. Naruto, being the closest, was the first to be attacked, with Pain simply raising his hand, as he had done for the entirety of the fight. You're not tense! Naruto didn't allow him to finish as he disappeared in a yellow flash, reappearing no more than a millisecond later with two other clones beneath the man as they delivered joint devastating kicks straight up. Naruto! He launched the Pain into the air, catching the unsuspecting man, unaware with the use of a seal he had just managed to place the last and only time he had touched him. It's sound barrage! And Pain looked around the mid-air to see an enormous whoop of air, a spear towards him, even as Taiyu, covered in lightning chakra, and came barreling in from the other side. Pain's eyes only narrowed momentarily before the air around him rippled violently. There was a moment as time seemed to freeze to a standstill. All four fighters watching each other with trained eyes. Then it was over and the area around Pain erupted like no other explosion. The ground just seemingly blowing outwards like it was hit by an invisible asteroid. And Gar managed to shield himself with sand, getting tossed backwards with a leap like a leaf in a storm while he took the full blunt of the attack, being thrown backwards through more than a few buildings. Naruto saw this out of the corner of his eye, but was unable to do anything about it as he turned, sending as much chakra as he could through his body before sprinting at an ungodly pace away from the sphere of destruction, very quickly expanding behind him. Gar managed to recover high up over his village as he watched with wide eyes at the destruction a single attacker had wrought. Over half the village gone. Just like that, there was nothing but one enormous crater. The only thing that told of anything being there before was the surrounding buildings. A single tear slid down young Kasakage's cheek as he looked at his precious village, reduced to a near pile of rubble. Luckily, he wasn't too far gone that he could reach out with his power, halting the massive flow of rubble and earth that was spreading out from where Pain floated. It took all his concentration, but he finally caught the massive wave of what used to be buildings, and more than likely his citizens. Before he could wipe the rest of Sunagakure off the map, his senses were fuzzy as he floated there, already feeling the effects of severe chakra exhaustion overtaking his body. As he limply began to descend to the ground, only slowed by his sand, he only hoped that Naruto could finish this. He had nothing left. Naruto could only look around him at the destruction, buildings lying in ruin at the edge of the craters, fire springing up at random from the destruction, then the crater itself. One giant plain of almost glazed sand, so smoothed by the invisible force that had caused it. And there, in the center, stood Pain, except a part of Naruto really didn't care about that. He was already running straight out over the crater that used to be the center of Suna, except he didn't run towards Pain. He ran around the edge of the crater, stared in horror at the small path of destruction Pain's body had caused. He tried to lock onto her with the seal he placed, but it must have been damaged from her fall because it wouldn't activate. He couldn't even flash to her. He tried not to fear the worst, but as he reached a particularly wrecked part of the city where the trail of destruction ended, it was hard not to see. And tears were streaming from his eyes as he fell to his knees, grabbing at chunks of rubble at random and pulling them away, sending them flying behind him as he tried to single-handedly excavate the building. He roared out in frustration, red chakra swirling around his body dangerously as three chakra tails swung violently behind him, destroying anything around him that was still standing in his anguish. Suddenly he turned his eyes slitted and his elongated canines bared as he locked onto the source of his pain. In a flash of speed rivaling his swift release, he appeared in the crater once again, staring across with furious eyes at the disappointed man at the center. And Pain just stood, observed the destruction he had brought in the name of his peace. He turned to see Naruto watching the boy drop to all fours and glare at him. Now that you know, Pain, maybe you can shut up. Naruto flashed across the clearing, but was swiftly battered away as Pain raised his hand. The chakra-cloaked body trembled in rage, trying again and again to breach the man's impenetrable guard, only to get knocked back every time. He roared again in frustration before clutching his wrist as a sphere of chakra instantly formed, roughly the size of his head. Bigger! The ball expanded as he forced more chakra in, letting the sphere grow until it was larger than he was. Bigger! It grew again, making him have to hold it above his body or risk being pulled into the maelstrom of energy. Bigger, damn it! Red began to leak into the monumental Rasengan as it swelled to the size of a small building. With one last deafening roar, Naruto slammed the enormous sphere down right on top of Pain. The release of energy it created almost rivaled that of Pain's village shattering attack. The ground around the two of them being upturned as pure chakra ripped outwards, destroying everything in its path. End of chapter 60.